The morning rose pale over the rooftops of the village, the air damp with mist, the stones of the church tower blackened with age. Within, the wooden stairs spiraled upward into shadow, groaning beneath each step, the walls smelling of dust and lime. The rope hung heavy from the bell above, thick with tar and sweat, frayed by years of pulling. Its weight waited in silence, patient as stone, until the ringer came. He climbed with slow rhythm, his boots scuffing upon worn planks, his breath rising in the cool gloom. His hand brushed the rough wall as he ascended, feeling the damp stone. Under his fingers, at the top, beneath the dim light, filtering through narrow slits, he paused, steadying himself. The rope swayed faintly in the draft, reaching downward from the darkness of the belfry above. He wrapped his hands around it, leaned his weight, and pulled. The tower shuddered. The air filled with a groan deeper than voice, a sound that belonged to stone and sky. The bell swung, its bronze mouth opening and closing against the air, striking its iron tongue, sending waves outward. The sound passed through walls, through streets, through fields, through the very bones of those who heard. Dogs barked, children stirred, women crossed themselves, men lifted their heads in the fields. The village was awake, not by sun, but by sound. He pulled again, body bent, rope taut, shoulders trembling. The bell answered, slower, heavier, a voice of iron and air. Each toll fell into silence before the next rose, each strike a measure of time, of prayer, of life itself. He counted without numbers, only by breath, only by rhythm, until the morning had been spoken in bronze. Then he released the rope, wiped sweat from his brow, and sat upon the bench beside the wall, his breath heavy, his hands rough with rope burn. The day passed below, but he remained within the tower, tending to silence as he had tended to sound. At noon he rose again, took the rope, and the bell tolled once more. Its voice spread across fields where men bent to harvest, across streets where women carried water, across chambers where the sick lay upon straw. Each heard it as command, as comfort, as a reminder. The bell did not speak words, yet it told all that must be known, the hour. The presence of God, the nearness of death evening came, and with it the vesper call. Climbed again, slower now, joints aching, breath shallow. He pulled the rope, the bell spoke, the tower trembled. Shadows lengthened across the fields, smoke rose from hearths, doors closed. The sound of the bell lingered long after it ceased, as though the air itself remembered. Night deepened. The tower stood in silence, stone black against the pale stars, rope hanging motionless. The ringer lay upon his narrow bed in the chamber below, blanket thin, hands folded, body weary. His ears still echoed with the day's tolls, his breath rising and falling with their memory. And in his sleep he dreamed not of voices, not of faces, but of bronze swinging in darkness. Striking, echoing, fading, returning, the morning mist had not yet lifted when he rose again, the chamber still cold, walls damp with the breath of stone. His cot creaked as he sat, blanket falling in folds, boots heavy upon the boards. He rubbed his eyes with the back of his hand, his beard rough against his palm, and for a moment he lingered in stillness, listening. The tower itself breathed faintly, the soft draught slipping through narrow slits, the far-off drip of water where the roof leaked, the faint shifting of the rope against its beam. All was patient, all was waiting. He drew his cloak about his shoulders, took the lantern, though the light was pale, and stepped to the stairs. Each board answered him with a groan, worn thin in the middle where countless steps had passed. His hand trailed against the wall, fingers brushing old lime, cracked and cool. Upward he went, circle upon circle, the climb itself a prayer. At the top, he paused, breath steadying, eyes lifting toward the dim outline of the bell above. The rope swayed gently, waiting. He wrapped his hands around it, calluses pressed against frayed hemp, and leaned with his weight. The rope sank, the wheel above turned, and the bronze giant began its arc. The tongue struck with a voice that seemed to come not from metal alone, but from the very marrow of stone. It rang out, heavy, solemn, patient. Once, twice, thrice, the morning was declared, the village awakened. Below, shutters opened, smoke rose from hearths, dogs barked, carts rolled from stables, children rubbed eyes, women carried buckets, men bent to their tools. All began their day not by clock or sun, but by this sound. Duh, the bell was their measure, their law, their breath. And he who bent to the rope was unseen, unknown, forgotten. Yet his labor was the heartbeat of their hours. He pulled until the count was full, till the sound had said all that was needed. His shoulders ached, his breath came heavy, sweat dampened. His brow, he released the rope, letting it sway to stillness, the echoes rolling outward long after silence returned. He sat then upon the bench against the wall, cloak falling about him, hands resting open upon his knees. For a while he only listened to the fading hum within the bronze, to the pigeons shifting in the rafters, to the sigh of the tower itself. The day wore forward. At noon he climbed again. The light outside was brighter now, fields wide and golden, yet within the tower the air remained dim, flower dry with dust, cool with stone. He grasped the rope once more, lifted, pulled, leaned. The bell answered, slower this time, deeper, its voice spreading over ripened grain, over children playing in lanes, over the dying who clutched rosaries in shadowed rooms. Its sound was not command, but reminder. All passes, all fades, all bends. To time he descended to eat bread hardened by the day, cheese sharp upon his tongue, water cool from the bucket. He ate alone, as he always did, seated upon the low stool by the slit window, watching the square below. Merchants arranged their wares, farmers called from carts, dogs wove between legs. He chewed slowly, swallowing with patience, his eyes lingering, not on faces, but upon the shadows lengthening from their feet. For all their noise, he heard only the silence that would follow, and in that silence, the bell. Evening gathered, and with it came the vesper call. He climbed once more, slower, joints stiff, lungs weary from dust. The rope swayed in waiting. He took it, pulled, felt its weight in his shoulders, in his back. The bell swung, its bronze mouth darkening with shadow, its voice ringing across. Smoke rising from chimneys, across mothers calling children inside, across fields darkening under the last light. Each toll was a thread binding day to night, labor to rest, life to silence. When the sound was done, he lingered in the chamber above. The air was thick with the smell of hemp and dust, the floor powdered with years of wear. He touched the wall, tracing with his finger the groove where rope had cut against stone. He sat upon the bench, lantern flickering beside him, shadows vast. The rope hung silent now, swaying faintly in draught. Above the bell waited, dark, still, eternal. Bowed his head, though no words formed, for the toll itself was prayer enough. Night deepened, descended lantern in hand into the lower chamber, where his cot lay. He lay upon it, boots still upon his feet, cloak still about his shoulders. His ears rang faintly with the memory of sound, a hum that lingered even in silence. His eyes closed, and in sleep he dreamed, not of faces, not of voices, but of rope in his hands, of bronze swinging above, of sound rolling outward into darkness, endless, steady, unbroken. The next day would come as the last had come, as the next would come after. He would rise, he would climb, he would pull, he would rest. The bell would sound, the village would answer, the world would move, and in the tower, unseen, unknown, he would endure. His life bound not to days or years, but to the rhythm of bronze, rope, and silence. The tower stood as it always had, its stones darkened by rain, its corners softened by wind, its roof black. Against the pale sky, the rope hung within, rough with tar, stiff with age, swaying faintly in the draught that moved through the narrow slits. Above, the bronze bell waited in silence, its mouth dark, its tongue still, its body bearing the scars of centuries. Each day it was called to voice, and each day its voice bore the weight of all who lived beneath it. The ringer rose before dawn, as he always did. His bones ached as he sat, the cot groaning under his weight, his breath shallow in the cold. He wrapped his cloak about him, laced his boots with stiff fingers, and lit the lantern, though the faintest gray already pressed at the slit in the wall. He listened, as he always did, to the silence of the tower, to the faint creak of rope, to the shuffle of pigeons above. Then he stood, slow but steady, and began the climb. The stairs wound upward, each board worn thin, each step a familiar groan. His hand traced the wall as he went, fingers finding the same cracks, the same patches of moss, the same chill dampness. The climb was long, yet it had long since ceased to be measured. It was not counted by steps, but by breath, not by height, but by silence. At the top, he paused, as he always did, to steady his lungs, to feel the draft upon his face, to see the dim rope swaying in shadow. He wrapped his hands around it, calluses, pressed a fray, and leaned his weight. The rope sank, the wheel above turned, and the bronze giant began to swing. The tower shuddered. The air filled with sound deeper than voice, heavier than prayer. The bell's tongue struck, the bronze mouth opened, and the first toll rolled outward into the gray morning. The sound passed through walls, across roofs, into fields, into cottages. It stirred sleepers, silenced dogs, drew eyes upward. The village awoke, not by sun, but by bell. He pulled again, body bent, shoulders trembling, back aching. The bell answered, slower, heavier, its voice rolling over the misted fields, across the black river, into the woods beyond. Each toll was a breath of the world, each pause a silence deeper than sleep. Counted them without number, only by rhythm, only by prayer. When the measure was full, he released the rope, and silence settled again. Though the air still trembled with echo, he sat then upon the bench, hands resting open upon his knees, cloak heavy across his shoulders, listened to the hum fading. Within the bronze, to the pigeons shifting in the rafters, to the faint stirrings below, the bell had spoken. His task was done, but he remained as though silence itself required tending. The day passed, as all days passed. He ate bread softened in broth, cheese sharp, water cold from the bucket. He chewed slowly, swallowing with care, eyes fixed upon the slit where light shifted across stone. At noon he climbed again, pulled again, the bell sounding its voice across. The fields, men bent at plows, lifted heads. Women at wells paused, children at play stilled. The dying clutched their beads. The living crossed themselves. All heard, all remembered, all were bound. Evening came, and he rose once more, slower now, joints stiff, back bowed. He took the rope in both hands, leaned, pulled, strained. The bell swung, groaned, struck, spoke, its voice spread across smoke. Rising from chimneys, across doors closing, across fields dimming into night, each toll bound day to silence, labor to rest, life to death. When it was done, he lingered, hand upon the rope, head bowed. The chamber was dim, lantern flickering, shadows vast. He sat upon the bench, breathing slow, body heavy. The rope hung. Still the bell rested above, the silence pressed close. For a time he closed his eyes, and in the darkness behind them he heard not silence but the echo of the toll, steady, unbroken. Night deepened. He lay upon his cot, blanket thin, boots still. Upon his feet, his ears rang faintly, a hum that did not cease, a rhythm that pulsed even in silence. He dreamed of the bell, not as bronze, not as rope, not as stone, but as breath itself. He dreamed of pulling without end, of sound without end, of silence without end. He dreamed of himself bent forever, climbing forever, listening forever. The seasons turned. In spring, the bell tolled above fields greening with wheat, above rivers swollen with melt, above floods pressing against walls. In summer, it tolled above dust rising, above heat shimmering, above sweat upon bent backs. In autumn, it tolled above harvest gathered, above leaves falling, above air sharp with smoke. In winter, it tolled above frost on roofs, above fields. white with snow, above rivers stiff with ice. Through each the rope was pulled, the bell answered, the sound spread, the ringer aged. His beard whitened, his eyes dimmed, his hands shook upon the rope. The climb wearied him, the pull bent him, the sound pressed upon his chest. Yet he endured, as the tower endured, as the bell endured, as the silence endured. His life was not measured in days, nor in years, but in tolls. Each strike of the tongue was a heartbeat, each pause a breath, each echo a prayer. And so it was, that he grew nearer to death, though he feared it not. For death was not silence, but the deepest toll, not absence, but the longest echo. He had heard it all his life, within bronze, within rope, within stone. When it came, he would know its voice. The tower stood black against the morning sky, stones damp with mist, its roof heavy with moss. Within, the air was cool and dim, filled with the faint smell of wood smoke drifting upward from hearths below, mingled with the dry scent of rope and dust. The bell hung in silence, its bronze sides dark, its tongue resting still. The rope stretched downward into the chamber, thick and frayed, swaying faintly in the draught. All waited, as it always waited, until the ringer came. He rose slowly from his cot, joints stiff, breath shallow. His beard was long now, white as flower dust, his hair thin upon his brow. His hands shook as he drew the cloak around his shoulders, his boots heavy upon his feet. He lit the lantern, though gray dawn already pressed at the narrow slit in the wall. Its flame trembled, casting long shadows across the chamber. He sat for a time upon the stool, gathering strength, listening to the silence of the tower. After a long while did he rise, steadying himself against the wall, and begin the climb. The stairs groaned beneath him, worn thin in the middle by years of passage. He leaned upon the wall with each step, his hand trailing against the cold stone. He paused often, breath catching in his chest, knees trembling. Yet always he climbed, circle upon circle, until at last he stood in the chamber beneath the bell. The rope hung before him, swaying gently, waiting. He placed both hands upon it, rough against rough, and leaned with his weight. The rope sank, the wheel above turned, and the bronze giant began its slow arc. The tongue struck with a voice deeper than words, older than memory. The sound rolled, outward, through walls, across roofs, over fields. It shook the air, stirred sleepers, silenced dogs, drew eyes upward. The village awoke not by sun but by bell. He pulled again, body bent, shoulders trembling. The bell answered, slow and heavy, each toll echoing into silence before the next. The tower shuddered with each swing, the rafters groaned, the pigeons stirred in alarm. His breath came harsh, his chest rattled, yet he continued, counting not. With numbers, but with rhythm, with prayer, with breath. When the measure was full, he released the rope, let it sway to stillness, sank onto the bench against the wall. There he sat long, cloak drawn around him, hands open upon his knees. His eyes closed, his head bowed. The chamber hummed faintly with the dying echo of bronze. Dust drifted in shafts of gray light. The pigeons resettled above. The silence thickened once more. The day moved slowly. At noon he climbed again, slower than before, knees aching, hands trembling. The rope felt heavier now, the weight pressing. Deeper into his shoulders, into his back. He pulled, gasping, chest tight, sweat damp upon his brow. The bell tolled once more, its voice rolling over fields golden with grain, over lanes where children played, over cottages where the sick lay upon straw. Each heard it as a reminder. Time passed, day waned, life faded. He descended with care, resting. Often against the wall, in the chamber below, he ate bread softened in broth, cheese sharp and dry, water cold from the bucket. He chewed slowly, swallowing with effort, his hands trembling with each motion. He sat long upon the stool, gazing through the narrow slit at the square below. Merchants called, farmers led carts, children laughed. He watched not their faces, but their shadows lengthening on the cobbles, as though the bell had already cast its mark upon them. Evening gathered. He rose once more, stiff and weary, and climbed again. The rope swayed in waiting, the draft colder now. He grasped it with both hands, leaned, pulled. The bell swung, its bronze mouth opening and closing against the dusk. Its voice spread across chimneys breathing smoke, across doors closing, across fields dimming into night. Each toll was thread binding day to rest, life to silence, body to dust. When it was done, he lingered, hands still upon the rope, head bowed. The chamber was dim, lantern flickering weakly, shadows vast upon the walls. He sat upon the bench, cloak heavy, breath ragged. His eyes closed, and he felt not rest, but wait, as though the bell itself pressed upon his chest. Night came. He descended, lanterned low, into the lower chamber where his cot waited. He lay upon it, boots still laced, cloak still about him. His breath rattled faintly. His chest rose and fell shallowly. His ears rang with echo of bronze, steady, unbroken. In sleep he dreamed not of faces, not of voices, but of rope heavy in his hands, of bronze swinging above, sound spreading into darkness. The seasons passed. In spring, floods pressed against the tower's base, water swelling high, the wheel of the bell dripping with spray. He climbed with difficulty, rope slick in his hands, bell booming across rain-lashed roofs. In summer, heat thickened the air. Sweat clinging to his brow, dust rising in shafts of light, bell rolling over fields brown with drought. In autumn, leaves swept through the square, whirling at the tower's base. Bells speaking across harvest gathered, across smoke rising from hearths. In winter, frost gripped the rope, ice rhymed the stone, bell groaning in the cold air, its sound, sharp as glass. Through all he climbed, he pulled, he endured, but he aged. His beard whitened fully, his hair thinned to nothing, his back bent, his eyes dimmed. The climb grew harder, the rope heavier, the bell's voice harsher. Each toll shook his chest, each echo lingered in his bones. He coughed often, breath shallow, hands trembling. Yet he endured, for the bell must be rung, and he was its servant, its keeper, its shadow. Evenings he lingered by the rope, head bowed, hands folded. He sat upon the bench long after sound had faded, lantern flickering low. Sometimes he whispered, though none heard, words without form, prayers without voice. Sometimes he only listened, hearing within silence the faint hum of bronze, the echo of his own heart. And so the years pressed upon him, as the rope pressed upon his shoulders, as the bell pressed upon his chest. Each toll was his breath, each echo his memory, each silence his prayer. He lived not by days, not by years, but by sound, by rhythm, by endurance. The tower endured as it had for centuries, stone blackened by rain, mortar chipped by wind, timbers within worn thin by footsteps. The bell hung in its wooden cradle, silent in the hours between, its bronze skin darkened by smoke and time, its tongue heavy with rust and memory. The rope descended, rough and frayed, bearing the sweat of countless hands, the dim chamber. Below, the ringer stirred upon his cot. He rose slowly, more slowly than in years before. His body resisted each motion, knees stiff, back bent, hands trembling. His breath came shallow, catching in his chest, as though each inhale bore a weight. He wrapped his cloak about him with fingers that shook, laced boots whose leather was cracked with age. He lit the lantern, though dawn pressed faintly at the slit in the wall. Its flame wavered, casting long shadows that stretched like black ropes across the stone. He sat for a while, bent forward, listening to the silence of the tower. The pigeons shifted in rafters above, the draft slipped through narrow gaps. The rope swayed faintly as if already calling. At last he rose, hand pressed against the wall for steadiness, and began the climb. The stairs groaned beneath him, each step a protest, each board a memory of his weight. He paused often, leaning against stone, breath harsh in his throat. Yet he climbed, circle upon circle, until he reached the chamber beneath the bell. There. The rope waited, rough and patient, swaying in the gloom. He wrapped both hands around it, calluses meeting hemp, and leaned with his weight, The rope sank, the wheel turned, the bronze giant stirred. The tongue struck, and sound filled the tower, deeper than words, heavier than breath. The bell swung, wide, its voice rolling outward, through walls, over rooftops, across fields. Dogs barked, children stirred, shutters opened. The village awoke, not by sun, but by bell. He pulled again, body bent, shoulders trembling, breath ragged. Each toll pressed against his chest, each echo seemed to rise from within his bones. His hands slipped on the rope, sweat damp upon palms, but he held. He pulled until the count was full, until the morning had been spoken in bronze. Then he let go, rope swaying, bell slowing, silence returning. He sat heavily upon the bench, cloak falling about him, hands resting open upon knees. His head bowed, eyes closed. The chamber hummed faintly with the dying echo. He lingered long, as though silence itself required his watch. At noon he climbed. Again, slower still. His knees shook, his chest burned, his breath wheezed. The rope felt heavier, the bell harsher. He pulled with effort, gasping, sweat dripping from his brow. The bell tolled over fields where men bent at plows, over streets where women carried water, over chambers where the dying lay with rosaries in hand. Each toll was both comfort and warning, both measure and memory. He descended with care, gripping the wall with each step. In the chamber below, he ate bread softened in broth, cheese sharp, water cool. He chewed slowly, swallowing with difficulty, hands trembling with each bite. He watched through the slit as children played in the square, as merchants called from carts, as dogs circled. He saw not faces but shadows lengthening upon cobbles. Each shadow was a toll of the bell, each toll a measure of time passing, of life bending toward silence. Evening came. He rose once more, joints aching, lungs weak, yet duty pressing heavier than frailty. He climbed hand upon stone, lantern dim. At the top rope swaying, he took it with both hands, leaned, pulled. The bell swung, its mouth opening against the dusk, its voice spreading across smoke rising from chimneys, across fields fading into night. Each toll-bound day to rest, labor to death, silence to eternity. When it was done, he lingered. He sat upon the bench, head bowed, hands folded. His breath was ragged, his chest ached, his body heavy, yet he did not descend at once. He waited in silence, eyes closed, hearing within the hush the faint hum of bronze, the echo of his own heart. He felt as though the bell pressed upon his chest, as though he carried its weight within him. Night deepened. He descended slowly, lantern flickering. In the lower chamber he lay upon his cot, boots still upon feet, cloak still upon shoulders. His breath rattled faintly, his chest rose and fell shallow. All his ears rang with echo of bronze, a hum unending, a rhythm steady. In sleep he dreamed of rope in his hands, of bronze swinging above, of sound rolling into darkness without end. He dreamed of pulling forever, of climbing forever, of enduring forever. Seasons turned once more. In spring, the floods swelled the river and pressed damp into stone. He climbed still, though his knees bent as reeds. In summer, heat pressed down upon the roof, dust thick in the air, sweat stinging his eyes. He pulled still, though breath burned. In autumn, winds rattled shutters, leaves swirled in the square. He told still, though his arms shook. In winter, frost rhymed the rope, ice stiffened the stairs, breath steamed in the chamber. He labored still, though his hands numbed yet. With each season, strength fled. His beard grew long and white, his back bent further, his eyes dimmed to shadow. His cough deepened, his chest rattled. He climbed slower, pulled weaker, lingered longer in silence. Each toll pressed deeper into his bones, each echo weighed heavier upon his breath, yet he endured. For the bell must be rung, and he was its servant until silence claimed him. Villagers began to speak of his frailty in hushed voices. They saw his bent figure upon the stair when the door was open, his white beard in lantern light, his trembling hands upon rope. They pitied, they respected, they feared, for the bell spoke not only of ours, but of death, and he who pulled it seemed already half its shadow. Children whispered of him as ghost, though he still lived. Farmers crossed themselves when they saw him as though he were already saint or spirit, but within the tower. He remained as he always had, unseen, unknown, enduring. His life was bound not to faces, nor to names, but to rhythm, to rope, to bronze. Each toll was his breath, each echo his memory, each silence his prayer. And so he grew nearer to the end, though he feared it not. For death was not silence, but the longest toll, not absence, but the deepest echo. Had heard it all his life. He would know its voice. The tower loomed as it always had, its stones dark with rain, its roof heavy with moss, its corners softened by centuries of wind. The rope hung within, frayed and rough, bearing the sweat of unnumbered hands. Above, the bronze bell rested in silence, its mouth dark, its tongue still, its sides scarred with the touch of time. And below, upon his cot, the ringer stirred once. More he rose slowly, more slowly than ever before. His breath rattled in his chest, his knees trembled before they could bear him. His hands shook as they reached for the lantern. His beard was long, white as frost, his hair thin, his eyes dim as mist. The cloak weighed upon his shoulders as though it were stone. Yet he rose, for the bell waited as it had always waited, and he was bound to it by more than duty, by more than life. He sat upon the stool, lantern trembling in his hand, flame casting long shadows across the walls. He listened, as he always did, to the faint creak of rope swaying, to the pigeons shifting above, to the whisper of draught through stone. He heard within these, not silence, but the echo of what was to come. For death was near, and he felt it not, as fear, but as presence, as patient as the bell itself. At last he stood, steadying himself with one hand against the wall, and began the climb. The stairs groaned beneath him, worn thin by his countless steps. He paused often, leaning against, cold stone, breath ragged, chest burning. His hand trembled upon the wall, his lantern shook, its flame flickering. Yet he climbed, circle upon circle, until he reached the chamber beneath the bell. The rope swayed faintly in the gloom, waiting. Took it in both hands, fingers trembling, palms damp. He leaned with his weight, and the rope sank. The wheel turned, the bronze giant stirred. The tongue struck, and the tower shook with a voice deeper than words, heavier than breath. The sound rolled outward, through walls, across roofs, over fields, through the very marrow of those who heard it. The village awoke, not by sun, but by bell. He pulled again, body bent, shoulders trembling, breath catching. Each toll pressed upon his chest as though the bell itself weighed within him. His arms shook, his legs weakened, his head swam with sound. Yet he pulled until the morning had been spoken in bronze, until the rhythm was complete. He released the rope, let it sway, and sank upon the bench, cloak falling about him. His head bowed, his eyes closed, his breath shallow. The chamber hummed faintly with the echo of bronze. At noon he climbed again, though his body resisted. Each step was pain, each breath fire. His hands trembled upon the rope, his knees bent as reeds. Yet he pulled, gasping, coughing, chest rattling. The bell answered, heavy, slow, its voice spreading across fields, across lanes, across cottages. The living paused, the dying listened, the children stilled. Each heard not only time, but eternity, not only hour, but silence beyond. He descended. With care, each step taken as though it might be his last. He ate little, bread softened in water, cheese broken into crumbs, water sipped slowly. His hands trembled so that the cup spilled, his beard dampened. He chewed slowly, swallowing with effort, eyes fixed upon the slit in the wall. Through it, he saw shadows moving below, men at carts, women at wells, children running. Their voices rose faint, distant, yet to him they seemed already as echoes. Fading before they were heard, evening came, and with it the vesper toll. He rose once more, body heavy, lungs weak, knees failing. He climbed with one hand always upon the wall, lantern dim, breath ragged. The rope swayed, waiting. He took it in both hands, leaned, pulled. The bell swung, its bronze mouth opening. Against the dusk, its tongue striking iron, its voice rolling into night. Smoke rose from chimneys, doors closed, fields darkened. Each toll was thread binding day to rest, life to death, sound to silence. When the last toll faded, he lingered. He sat upon the bench, hands folded, head bowed. The chamber was dark, lantern. Faint shadows vast. His breath rattled, his chest ached, his body weary. He closed his eyes, and in the hush he felt death near as the rope, as near as the bell. He did not fear it. He had heard its voice all his life within bronze, within echo, within silence. Night deepened. He descended slowly, lantern dim, into the lower chamber. He lay upon his cot, boots still upon feet, cloak still upon shoulders. His breath came shallow, rattling in his chest. His ears rang with the hum of bronze, steady, unending. In sleep, he dreamed of rope in his hands, of bronze swinging above, of sound spreading into darkness. He dreamed of death, not as silence, but as toll, not as absence, but as echo. The seasons turned once more. In spring, floods pressed against the tower's base, water lapping at stones. He climbed still, though his knees bent, though his chest rattled. In summer, heat thickened the air, sweat dampened his brow, dust clung to his beard. He pulled still, though breath burned, though arms trembled. In autumn, winds howled through slits, leaves whirled in the square. He told still, though his hands shook, though his back bent. In winter, frost rimed the rope, ice stiffened the stairs, breath steamed in the chamber. He labored still, though his fingers numbed, though his lungs burned. Yet with each season, strength fled. His beard grew longer, his eyes dimmer, his back bent further. His cough deepened, his breath shortened, his hands trembled without cease. Each toll weighed upon him, each echo pressed within his bones. Yet he endured, as the tower endured, as the bell endured, as silence endured. The villagers spoke of him. In hushed tones, they said he was old as the tower, old as the bell, old as time. Pitied him, they respected him, they feared him. Children whispered of him as ghost, though he still lived. Farmers crossed themselves when they heard the bell, as though it were rung by spirit, not by man. Women lit candles not only for prayer, but for him, that he might endure one day longer. But within the tower he remained as he always had, unseen, unknown, enduring. His life was measured not in days, not in years, but in tolls. Each strike was a heartbeat, each echo a breath, each silence a prayer. The tower endured. Its stones darkened by centuries of rain, its corners worn smooth by wind, its timbers scarred by age. The bell hung within, bronze, vast and patient, its mouth dark, its tongue still, its body bearing the weight of silence. The rope stretched downward, frayed and rough, heavy with the sweat of hands long gone. And in the chamber below, the ringer lay upon his cot, his breath shallow, his body weak, his eyes dim. He stirred, as he always had, though each motion now was struggle. His beard lay long upon his chest, white as frost, his hands trembled even at rest. His breath rattled softly in his lungs, as though the bell already tolled within him. He rose slowly, sitting upon the cot's edge, cloak falling heavily across his shoulders. He sat long, head bowed, gathering strength, listening. The tower sighed faintly, the pigeons shifted in the rafters, the rope creaked against its beam. All seemed nearer to silence than sound. At length he took the lantern, flame trembling in his unsteady hand, and began the climb. The stairs groaned. Beneath him, his steps slow, his knees bending, his chest catching with each breath. He paused often, leaning against cold stone, the lantern shaking, the flame flickering. His eyes blurred with sweat, with weariness. Yet he climbed, circle upon circle, until he reached the chamber beneath the bell. The rope swayed faintly, waiting. He grasped it with both hands, fingers trembling, palms damp. He leaned with his weight, and the rope sank. The wheel turned. The bronze giant stirred. The tongue struck, and sound filled the tower, heavy, slow, unbroken. It rolled outward through stone, across roofs, over fields, into the very bones of those who heard it. The village awoke, not by sun, but by bell. He pulled again, shoulders trembling, breath ragged, chest aching. Each toll pressed deeper into his bones. Each echo lingered longer within his ears. His arms shook, his legs weakened, his vision dimmed. Yet he pulled until the morning had been spoken, until the rhythm was complete. He released the rope, let it sway, and sank upon the bench. Cloak gathered about him, his head bowed, his eyes closed, his breath shallow. The chamber hummed faintly with the echo of bronze, a hum that seemed to come from within him. At noon he climbed again, slower, weaker. His knees buckled, his chest burned, his breath wheezed. He clung to the rope as though it alone held him upright. He pulled, gasping, coughing, trembling. The bell answered, slow and deep, its voice spreading across fields golden with harvest, across streets filled with labor, across chambers where the dying lay with beads in hand. Each heard not only the hour, but the presence of eternity. Not only sound, but silence beyond sound. He descended with care, one hand always upon the wall. He ate little bread softened in water, cheese crumbled between trembling fingers, water sipped in drops. His hands shook so that the cup spilled, his beard dampened. He watched through the slit as villagers passed, carts rattled, children played. Their voices rose, faint, distant, as though already fading into echo. He saw not life, but shadows, stretching, lengthening, reaching toward night. Evening came, and with it the vesper toll. He rose once more, though his body resisted, though his breath faltered, climbed. Lantern dim, steps unsteady, knees failing, the rope swayed in waiting, grasped it, leaned, pulled. The bell swung, its voice rolling into dusk, across smoke rising from chimneys, across fields dimming into shadow, across doors closing. Each toll was thread binding day to night, body to dust, life to death. When it was done, he lingered. Sat upon the bench, hands folded, head bowed. The chamber was dim, lantern faint, shadows vast. His breath rattled, his chest ached, his body heavy. He closed his eyes, hearing in the hush, not silence, but the faint hum of bronze, the steady toll of his own heart. He felt death near as the rope, as near as the bell. Night came. He descended slowly, lanterned low. In the lower chamber he lay upon his cot, cloak still upon shoulders, boots still upon feet. His breath rattled faintly, his chest rose, and fell shallow. His ears rang with the echo of bronze, steady, unbroken. In sleep he dreamed of rope heavy in his hands, of bronze swinging above, of sound rolling into darkness. He dreamed of death not as silence, but as toll, not as absence, but as echo. The seasons pressed on. In spring, floods swelled against the tower's base, and he climbed still, though his knees bent, though his chest rattled. In summer, heat weighed upon him, dust clung to his beard, sweat ran down his brow, and he pulled still, though breath burned. In autumn, leaves swirled in lanes, winds howled through cracks, and he told still, though his arms shook, though his back bent. In winter, frost rimed the rope, ice stiffened the stairs, breath smoked in the chamber. And he labored still, though his fingers numbed, though his lungs burned. Each season was harder, each toll heavier. His beard grew long and thin, his eyes dimmed to shadows, his back bent low, his cough deepened. He climbed slower, pulled weaker, lingered longer in silence. Each toll pressed deeper into his bones, each echo trembled within his chest. He felt his body yielding, as rope phrased, as stone chips, as timber cracks. The villagers whispered of him, said he was old as the bell, old as the tower, old as time. They pitied him, they respected him, they feared him. Some said he was already ghost, others said he was saint. Children spoke of him in hushed voices, imagining him pale as dust, white-bearded as cobweb, more shadow than man. Farmers crossed themselves when the bell tolled, for they thought it rung by spirit, not by flesh. Yet within the tower he remained, climbed, he pulled, he told. His life was bound not to faces nor to names, but to rhythm, to rope, to bronze. Each toll was his breath, each echo his memory, each silence his prayer. The tower endured, black against the pale sky, its stones streaked with rain, its timbers groaning softly in the wind. The bell rested above, its bronze vast and patient, its voice waiting in silence. The rope hung in the dim chamber, frayed and worn, heavy with memory. And below, upon the narrow cot, the ringer lay still, his breath shallow, his body weary beyond measure. He rose with great struggle, more than any morning before. His knees trembled, his hands shook, his breath caught before it filled his chest. His beard lay long upon his cloak, white as winter frost. His eyes, dim and veiled, searched the chamber as if already seeing more than stone and shadow. He sat upon the edge of the cot, gathering strength, listening. The tower whispered in draught, the pigeons shifted faintly above, the rope creaked. In its beam, death was near, not as stranger, but as companion, as patient as the bell itself. He took the lantern in trembling hand, its flame faint and small, and began the climb. Each step was labor, each stair a burden. The boards groaned beneath him, the wall supported his weight. He paused often, his chest rattling, his breath shallow. Yet he climbed, for the bell must be rung, and he was its servant still. At last he reached the chamber beneath the bell. The rope swayed gently, waiting as it had always waited. He placed both hands upon it, fingers trembling, palms damp. He leaned his weight, and the rope yielded. The wheel above turned, the bronze giant stirred. The tongue struck, and sound filled. The tower it rolled outward, heavy and slow, through walls, across roofs, into the fields. The village awoke not by sun, but by bell. Children stirred in straw beds, women rose from hearths, men lifted tools. Yet those who listened closely felt the bell's voice slower, heavier, as though it spoke not only the hour, but also the end of a life. He pulled again, though his shoulders trembled, his knees bent, his chest burned. Each toll shook his body, pressed upon his heart, echoed within his bones. His vision blurred, his breath faltered, yet he pulled, toll after toll, until the morning was complete. He let go, rope swaying, bell slowing, silence returning. He sank upon the bench, cloak, heavy head bowed. His breath came shallow, his chest rattled. The chamber hummed faintly with the echo of bronze, a hum that seemed to rise from within him. At noon he climbed once more, though each step threatened to be his last. His lantern flickered, his hand trembled upon the wall. At the rope he leaned, pulled, gasped. The bell answered, deep and slow, its voice spreading across fields golden with harvest, across lanes, across cottages. The sick clutched rosaries, the dying closed their eyes, the children stilled. Each toll was not only measure of time, but reminder of silence. Not only voice of bell, but voice of death. He descended with care, leaning heavily against stone. In the lower chamber he ate little, bread soaked in water, crumbs of cheese, drops of water spilled upon beard.
Ouch.
His hands trembled, his breath faltered. He gazed through the slit at the square below, merchants shouting, carts rattling, children laughing. Yet to his ears they were echoes already fading, saw their shadows lengthening, though the sun was still high. Evening came. He rose with effort, cloak dragging upon floor, lantern weak. He climbed slowly, pausing at each turn, his knees weak, his chest tight. At the rope he leaned, grasped, pulled. The bell swung, its bronze mouth opening against the dusk. Its voice spread across, smoke rising, across doors closing, across fields darkening. Each toll was thread binding day to night, life to death. Breath, to silence. When the last toll faded, he did not release the rope at once. He held it, trembling, his forehead resting upon rough hemp. His breath faltered, his chest rattled. He sank upon the bench, lantern flickering faint, shadows vast, his head bowed, his eyes closed. He lingered long, hearing in silence the hum of bronze, the echo of his heart, the nearness of death. Night fell. He descended slowly, lantern weak, flame wavering. In the lower chamber, he lay upon his cot, cloak still upon shoulders, boots still upon feet. His breath rattled faint, his chest rose and fell shallow. His ears rang with the echo of bronze, steady, unbroken. In his sleep he dreamed of rope in his hands, of bronze swinging above, of sound rolling into darkness without end. He dreamed of himself climbing forever, pulling forever, tolling forever. The next morning came gray and heavy. He rose, slower than ever. His hands shook, his knees failed, his breath faltered. He climbed, step by step, lantern trembling. At the top he reached the rope, swaying faintly. He took it, leaned, pulled. The bell swung, its voice deep, heavy, slow. The village stirred, listening. Yet those who heard felt its sound strange, burdened, final. He pulled again, body bent, shoulders trembling, chest failing. His hand slipped. Upon rope, sweat damp upon palms. He gasped, coughed, staggered. Yet he pulled toll after toll until his body could no more. The last toll rolled outward, deep, slow, unbroken. It lingered long, echoing through walls, across roofs, over fields. Dogs barked, children hushed, women crossed themselves. The air trembled, the ground seemed to hold its breath, and when the sound faded, silence remained. He sat upon the bench, cloak heavy, hands folded, head bowed, his breath shallow, his chest rattled, his eyes closed, his head lowered. The lantern flickered, the rope swayed, the bell rested above. His breath faltered, slowed, ceased. The tower stood silent. The rope hung still. The lantern died. The pigeons shifted above, wings rustling faint. The bell rested in darkness. The tower stood as it had stood for centuries, its stones darkened by rain, its roof bent beneath moss, its corners softened by wind. Within, the rope hung still, swaying faintly in the draught, rough and frayed, carrying the memory of countless hands. Above, the bell waited, its bronze silent, its tongue resting in shadow. Below, the cot was empty, the lantern cold, the cloak folded upon the stool. The ringer was gone. Yet the village rose as it always did, eyes turning to the tower when dawn came. They waited for the voice of the bell, for the bronze toll that had marked their mornings since before they remembered. The sound did not come. Silence spread across the roofs, through the lanes, into the fields. Dogs barked uneasily. Children stirred without rising. Women paused at hearths. Men glanced toward the tower. The air felt heavier, as though the very stones held their breath. At last, young men climbed the stairs, their steps uncertain, their lanterns trembling in draught. They found the cot empty, the cloak folded, the air thick with dust. They climbed higher, into the chamber of the rope, where it swayed in silence. Higher still, into the belfry, where pigeons stirred upon beams. There, they saw nothing but the bell, vast bronze, patient, resting as though asleep. They returned with pale faces, voices hushed. The ringer was gone. That day the bell was silent. The village worked in unease, their hours unmeasured, their tasks unbound. Market opened. Late fields were left untended, prayers whispered without order. They moved as though lost, for without the bell, they did not know the shape of the day. At evening no sound called them to rest, and they lay down uneasily, listening for echoes that did not come. On the second day, a boy climbed the tower, his hands small upon rope. He pulled with all his strength. The bell stirred faintly, gave a voice weak and uneven, then fell still. The sound rolled outward, broken, trembling, yet the village heard it as miracle. They crossed themselves, they wept, they whispered. The ringer was not gone, but present still, guiding the rope unseen. So it was that others came, young men, strong arms, pulling with effort. The bell answered, not with the rhythm it had known, but with uneven voice, harsh at times, faint at others. Yet beneath its sound, they swore they heard another, the steady rhythm of old hands, the breath of old lungs, the murmur of old prayer. They said the ringer remained unseen, unheard, yet guiding, watching, enduring. In time the village spoke of him not as man, but as spirit. Children whispered that his shadow moved among rafters, that his hand rested upon the rope, that his cough lingered in the dust. Women lit candles for him, placing them at the tower's base. Men crossed themselves when the bell tolled, even if rung by other hands. The dying whispered his name, though none remembered it clearly. He became not man but presence, not memory but legend. Seasons turned. In spring, the floods swelled, and the bell tolled across waters dark and swollen. In summer, dust rose from fields, and the bell tolled across heat and haze. In autumn, leaves whirled through lanes, and the bell tolled across smoke and harvest. In winter, frost rhymed the stones, and the bell tolled across snow and silence. Each sound was heavier now, slower, yet beneath it all, villagers swore they heard the old rhythm. Creak, glide, strike. Pilgrims began to come. From neighboring valleys, from distant towns. They came not only for market, not only for prayer, but for the bell. They knelt in the square, heads bowed, listening to its heavy voice. Some swore they heard the ghostly echo of a second toll, faint beneath the first, steady, unbroken. Some swore they saw a pale figure at the belfry slit, beard white, cloak heavy, eyes dim, watching. They left offerings at the tower's base, bread, coins, candles. The river carried some away, the wind snuffed others, the pigeons scattered the crumbs. Yet still they came, season after season. The tower itself aged. Its stones cracked, its mortar crumbled, its timbers sagged. The bell bore new scars, green with moss, dark with soot. The rope frayed further, patched with knots, rough with tar. Yet still it endured as though bound not by wood nor stone, but by presence, by silence, by rhythm. Children grew with the tale. They learned that the ringer had not died, but had passed into the bell, into the rope, into the tower itself. They learned that his breath rose in dust, that his hands guided there, hands that his prayer lingered in the toll. They learned to bow their heads at its sound, for it was more than bronze, more than rope. It was the voice of endurance, of silence, of death itself. And so he lived on, though gone. He lived in echo, in dust, in silence. He was no longer remembered, but never forgotten. He was no longer seen, but always present. He was absence that was present, death that was life, silence that was sound. The tower stood through seasons as it always had, its stones damp in spring rain, its walls bright with moss in summer sun, its roof veiled with drifting leaves in autumn, its corners frosted with ice in winter. The bell within endured, its bronze heavy, its tongue scarred, its voice rolling outward when summoned. The rope, patched and frayed, swayed in the draught, though the ringer's cot lay empty, his cloak folded in dust, his hands long gone, to earth. Still, the village spoke of him as though he had never left. Children born after his passing grew hearing not tale but truth, that the ringer dwelled still in the bell, that his breath was the dust, that his prayer was the echo. They bowed their heads at each toll, not merely for God, but for him, who had carried sound into their lives and silence into their deaths. Women whispered to children at night, "Listen to the bell, and you will hear him breathing." Men at labor paused when its bronze voice rolled across fields, saying under breath, "He endures." In taverns, in markets, in gatherings by hearth, the villagers spoke of him as presence. They said when storms came and the bell tolled deep, he was warning them. They said when marriages were blessed, his hands steadied the rope. They said when graves were dug, his shadow stood by the mourners. No one asked if it were true, for truth was no longer needed. The sound itself was enough. Travelers carried the story outward. Merchants leaving the square repeated what they had heard, that the bell was haunted, that the ringer still pulled its rope, that his spirit kept the tower standing. Pilgrims spoke of visions in the belfry, a pale figure bent by years, beard white as frost, cloak heavy, eyes dim. They said his hands had passed through theirs when they grasped the rope, guiding them, steadying them, binding them to the rhythm. In neighboring valleys the story grew. Men said the bell tolled on its own, without hand, without rope, when death came to the village. Women said they had heard it in the night, though the air was still. Children whispered that the ringer walked not only the tower, but the lanes. A shadow with no sound, seen only when the bell groaned at dusk. Fear and reverence mingled as they always do when silence takes shape. The creed spread. In towns beyond the hills, priests spoke of the ringer as parable. They said his life of toil was prayer, his endurance was faith, his silence was devotion. They said he showed that labor itself was sacred, that pulling rope was no less holy than chanting psalm. Some prayed not only to saints but to him, calling him keeper of ours, guardian of souls, servant of silence. Candles were lit in chapels with his name upon the flame, though his name was not remembered, and still the bell tolled. Young men climbed the tower, bent their backs, pulled the rope, set the bronze mouth swinging. Yet they said they were not alone, that the rope grew lighter when they grasped it, that a shadow bent beside them, that a breath whispered in dust. They said the sound was not theirs but his, that they were only hands borrowed by the unseen. Seasons turned, floods pressed against the tower's base, winds howled through its slits, frost cracked its stones. Yet it endured, as though bound not by mortar, but by presence. The bell bore new scars, its bronze streaked with green, its voice deepening with age. Yet when it tolled, villagers still said, "He speaks." Children grew with the story upon their tongues they knew not when it began, for it was older than memory. They told each other by lamplight that the ringer walked the stairs still, boots scuffing, cloak dragging, lantern dim. Dared one another to enter the tower at night, to listen in silence. Some swore. They heard footsteps above. Some swore. They saw a lantern glow. Some fled in terror. Laughter, too loud. Eyes wide with fear, and so the ringer became more than man, more than memory. He became presence across valleys, across towns. His bell was not one bell, but all bells. His rope, not one rope, but all ropes. When bronze tolled in distant towers, some said, "It is him." When ropes creaked in dim chambers, some whispered, "He pulls still." When silence lingered after sound, all felt that he was there. The tower endured through all changes. Storms bent its timbers, frost cracked its stones, moss crept deep into its mortar, yet it stood. The bell within hung vast and solemn bronze. Blackened with centuries, its tongue scarred, its voice heavy. The rope swayed in its long descent, patched with knots, coarse with tar, waiting always in silence. The cot below lay empty, the cloak gathered dust, the lantern rusted. The ringer's body was gone to earth, but his name remained upon the breath of the people, carried from mouth to mouth, from season to season, from valley to valley. At first, they spoke of him as man, a keeper of ours. Then as ghost, bound to tower and rope. Now, as years folded into years, his image grew vaster. No longer confined to one place, he became symbol. His bell was not one bell, but all bells. His rope not one rope, but all ropes. His silence not one silence, but the silence that underlay all things. When the bell tolled in the village, villagers bowed their heads, not only for prayer, but for the memory of him. When the bell tolled in distant towns, strangers bowed as well, for word had spread that all bells echoed his, that all tolls were his breath. Some said he had become the sound itself, that each strike of bronze was his heartbeat, that each echo was his prayer, that each silence after was his rest. In monasteries, monks wrote of him. They described him not as spirit of one tower, but as figure of time itself. They said the world was his tower, the heavens his bell, the earth his rope, eternity his toll. They said his life of labor revealed a truth, that all existence was the pulling of a rope, the swinging of a bell, the sounding of hours into silence. They copied these words upon parchment, lit candles before them, and chanted as though his rhythm were scripture. Pilgrims came in greater numbers. They crossed fields, rivers, forests, not for the market, not for the church, but for the tower. They knelt in the square, heads bowed, listening to the bronze toll. Some wept, saying they heard within it the voices of their dead. Some trembled, saying they heard within it their own ending. Some smiled faintly, saying they felt peace, as though eternity itself had spoken. They left bread, candles, coins, not only for God, but for him. The wind snuffed the flames, the pigeons scattered the crumbs, the river carried the coins, yet pilgrims left more in taverns. Men spoke of him as eternal laborer. They said he had bartered with death, pulling the rope for eternity so that the world might continue. In cottages, women hushed children by saying, "Listen, the bell is his breath. If it stops, the world will fall silent." Men paused. At noon, heads bent, whispering, "He calls us still." Children learned to fear and to revere him. They dared one another to climb the tower at night, to touch the rope in darkness. Some swore it was warm, as though held by unseen hands. Some swore it tugged against them, pulling of its own accord. They fled, laughter sharp with fear, but they spoke of it for years, and so the tale grew. Seasons circled. Spring floods pressed against stone, summer dust hung thick in rafters, autumn winds shook shutters, winter frost stiffened rope. Through each, the bell tolled, its voice slower, heavier, deeper, and beneath its sound, faint. But steady, men swore they heard another. Creak, glide, strike. The words of the monks spread beyond cloister walls. They reached towns, cities, lands far from the tower. Their two men spoke of the ringer, not as man, not as ghost, but as parable. They said he was the measure of existence, that his rope was the line of time, that his bell was the beating of the cosmos. They said stars were sparks struck by his bronze, that dawn was the rising of his echo, that night was the silence after his toll. Some built towers and hung bells, saying they rang in his rhythm. Some wrote hymns, chanting his silence. Some prayed not only for salvation, but for endurance, asking to be like him, steady, patient, unbroken. The river of light across the night was thin and pale when the bell began again. The tower stood beneath it like a dark knuckle pressed against the sky. Wind moved the moss upon the stones, and the stones answered with their old chill. Within, the rope hung from the unseen beam, patched with old knots and edged with tar, swaying faintly because night itself breathed. No hand held it then, yet the tower remembered hands, and the rope remembered palms, and the bronze above remembered the long rise and fall of a body bent to service. The ringer was gone into earth, but the rhythm he had taught to timber and air endured as lichen endures upon stone, quiet and slow. In the village below, roofs wore the last silver of dew. Doors closed and latched, awaited the hour when habit would draw them open. In each house lay the small arrangements of years, a stool beneath a window rubbed smooth by elbows, a jug with a crack along its lip that, for all its flaw, still carried water, a hearth scarred by years of flame, and above the hearth a drying line that had held winter herbs, child clothes, funeral crepe. The bell had marked each change, and though mouths had forgotten the names of those who pulled its rope bones, remembered the weight of its sound. They turned slightly in their sleep when the first hint of toll pressed through rafters, as once they had turned for the ringer's voice. Though no voice had ever called, pilgrims came in the dull light before dawn. They came without trumpets, without banners, walking single and then in twos where the path narrowed, their sandals wet with meadow damp. They brought no great offerings, only crust and candle and coin. Most of the coins were brown and dull, and most of the candles were stubs. They waited together beside the low wall of the yard, their eyes on the slit windows of the tower where no lantern burned. Some had traveled a day, some many days, and all held the same quiet expectation that the toll would gather their hearts and set them in order. When the sound rose, it came as weight, not as surprise. The bronze moved its breath into the air, and the air carried it on, as water carries a leaf not faster, only farther, and with the same patient insistence. Men standing upon the eastern ridge lifted their heads and knew the village had woken. A woman walking the cart track toward the river paused and considered how many loaves she might bake before the next toll fell. A child turned in bed and pressed closer to the warmth because the bell had said morning, and morning had always said bread. Those who had taken up the rope in the ringer's stead were strong in arm and young in foot, yet even they pulled, as though guided by another strength. When their palms slipped, they felt the rope steady itself. When the bell's mouth faltered in my dark, a steadier arc returned. When they mistook the count, the silence between tolls taught them to correct it. They learned that the bell was not a thing to be commanded, but to be answered. To pull against it was to fight a river. To move with it was to pass through the water unbroken. They learned how the breath must be set, not the short breath of haste. Not the ragged breath of fear, but the long breath of fields, of seasons, of years. The bell spoke the day. Not its events, which were countless and small and seldom new, but its shape. Men bent their backs in furrow and notched their labor against the sound. Women kneaded, set aside, and returned to the dough by that same measure. A shepherd, hearing the noon toll from his rough stone fold on the far slope, turned his flock toward the stream and sat with his heel hooked in his crook, counting the silence between echoes and knowing from it how long the bread would lie in coals. The sound did not hurry them. It merely told them where they were upon the great wheel. Seasons widened and narrowed like the bell's mouth. In the spring the tower's base darkened with seepage, where the ground held water long. In such days the toll went out overflooded, meadows and drifted among poplar trunks like a pale mist of sound. In summer the air in the stairwell grew warm as a breath, and the rope rasped dry. The bell's tone and heat was different, deeper by a hair, and one could hear in it the weight of the baked world. In autumn the sound moved among stubble and smoke. It found the hollow pumpkins set upon sills and made them faintly hum. It lay upon the threshing floor and made the chaff tremble. In winter it rang sharp as the edge of ice, and dogs that in other seasons went on barking fell quiet to listen, as if the sound had passed too near to some old place in them and required a stillness beyond their understanding. When the burial processions made their way into the yard, and the spades stood ready like blunt spears against the wall, the bell did what it had always done. It set a space around the grief so that it might be carried. The men who walked with the straps upon their shoulders felt their steps steady under the toll, as boats steady under a regular swell. The women who held the end of the cloth felt the cloth heavier by exactly the weight they could bear. In whose ears the bell had tolled since they had been sons, counted the strokes without counting. Seeing in the air above each stroke the shape of the face they had loved, not as it had been at the end, but as it had once been, when fields were green behind it, and laughter still new. And if the dead were of those who had taken up the rope, the tower itself seemed to bow not in any way that stone can bow, but in a settling of shadow, in a gentling of draught, in a patience wider than the yard. There were weddings also, marked by the lightest possible hand upon the rope. The bell that could be heavy as earth became then a bird rising, not tinny. Oh, for it had never known that thin speech, but lifted, with an air beneath it, ran the lanes as if the sound had loosened their feet. Old women, hearing it, remembered their own hands dark with flour, their own skirts hung beside a fire, and smiled. The bell was not joy. It allowed joy to find its measure and to last. It told the village, this laughter belongs here, and here again, and here again, and so shall it endure beyond its day. Storms came that made the tower invisible even to men standing at its base. Rain ran down the stair in ropes, and the rope itself drew water until its hemp revived and swelled, and the hands that held it found it heavier and more alive. Lightning showed the bell only in slices of brightness, as if someone above were opening and closing a lid upon a sun. The toll was not steady. It moved as weather moves, in pulses and withdrawals. And yet the count was kept across the tumult, and on the last long roll of thunder, when the air sighed and the rain became a whisper upon lintels, The final echo clung to the stone as dew clings to grass. Men slept afterward as if some huge creature had passed and would not return. Famine brushed the valley one year as lightly as a sleeve, as might brush a leaf, and yet left marks that would be read for a generation. The bell's tone in that season lay low in the belly. It touched the bread before it was divided and gave the division solemnity. Mothers cut slices thinner, yet no one said anyone had eaten less. They said only that the hour had passed beneath the bell. Men went farther for work and returned later. They marked their return by the evening toll, and if they came after it had ceased, they went first to the yard and sat upon the low wall to let the last memory of the sound sink into them, and only then did they go in. The tower stood as if it had stepped one pace closer to everything. The legend of the ringer widened without the help of mouths. It grew, as moss grows, evenly in a place that provides what moss requires. Some said the ringer walked the round of stairs at the hour before dawn, and rested his hand upon the new rung set by the young men when the old had failed. Others said he sat in the belfry with his back to the great curve of bronze and kept
the pigeons from nesting in the carve of its letters.
Those who knew the bell best, the men whose shoulders had leaned beneath its voice, said little, for they felt in their arms that to speak of such a thing is to lower it. But children who must speak or burst told of a lantern sometimes seen, where no foot could stand. A pale float of dimness that stayed for the length of a single toll, and then went out as if pinched by fingers they could not see. Beyond the valley, the bell came to be used as a measure of distance. Travelers said, "We will reach the bend of the river by the 9th toll, if we keep up our pace." And later, they said, "We are 2 good tolls from shelter." The sound carried in the right wind as far as the ridge where the bent pines stood. Men there learned to hear not only the toll, but the shape of air that carried it, and in their talk it became a kind of weather. Some kept a little note-stick by the lintel, and with it scratched upon wood the mark of how the bell had come to them, full or thin, bold or shaken, until the lintel itself bore weather in its wounds, and the scriptorium of a monastery a daze. Right away, a man whose hand had been taught long patience drew a circle upon vellum, and wrote within its rim words that the bell had taught him, that existence was the stretching of a rope between silence and sound, that the hand that stretched, it must be steady, and that the steadiness itself was the prayer. He drew the bell upon the vellum, not as a bell, but as a hemisphere of the firmament, with a small tongue at its heart like a hanging star. He did not show this page to many, because it was not doctrine, it was a hearing. But those who saw it bowed their heads as they would bow at the toll, and the bow itself told them they had understood. There were years when nothing new could be remembered afterward, no great feast, no fire, no death to mark with stones. The bell kept those years too. Such times its voice was level as a well-kept path. The rope wore smooth upon the hands. Children who had been born when snow lay deep learned to count the day by the bronze and were soon setting their tasks. Without being told, carts entered and left the square, and the daylight itself seemed to hinge upon the sound. The valley in those plain years was not dull, but true. There was a rightness in the repetition that required no song. Men grew old with that steadiness beneath their ribs, and when they lay down, laid their faces toward the tower. It had become as necessary as a wall that keeps out wind. When the wheel of the heavens darkened one morning, in the sun's light, thinned to a ring, and the birds fell silent, and even the insects lay quiet upon the undersides of leaves, the tower stood as if it too had been told to hold its breath. The bell was not rung, the rope hung, living in the draught. All eyes turned upward to the strange noon, but all hearts leaned to the west slit, where the bell's lip could be seen against a sky gone iron. Then, as the light thickened again upon fields and men realized their hands were their own, the bell swung once. That single toll set the world back upon its axle. It told them that what had passed, that the old measures still held. They returned to work without speech, and in the evening they left a crust upon the yard wall as one leaves thanks at a door. A mason fell from the outer scaffold one summer and lived, though his leg refused him afterward. He made his bed against the south wall of his cottage and learned the day all over again from beneath a blanket, without eyes for the fields. The bell taught him the pattern he could not watch. It gave back noon. It folded evening. It drew the darkness across his room with steady hands. He said to his daughter, who feared that misery may nibble through the heart like a mouse through corn, "You are safe if you listen. The tower holds." After he died, she brought the old man's stick to the yard and leaned it in the corner beneath the bell rope window. The men who pulled in their season saw it there and nodded, because they knew what made an object holy was not its shape, but the patient thumb that had polished it. In years of peace, the bell did not become idle. It marked the hours in which nothing happened, and those hours proved to be the body of life. Without them, the few remembered days would have been sticks without flesh. The bell gave weight to the unremarkable and allowed it to be born. Also called men to amend what could be amended. When quarrels had split a street into two quiets that did not cross, a priest said to the younger of the two disputants, "Go to the tower at vespers, and lay your palm upon the rope while the bell is pulled." The man did, and though the rope burned his skin because hemp is harsh, he found his anger set into that same steady measure and made small. He left the tower without the last words he had prepared for his neighbor, and when he passed the man's door, he found his shoulder had somehow turned of its own accord. And since his shoulder had turned, his head could not help but bow. The bell grew older. Its lip took a thin chip in a winter's contraction. The crack did not spread, but the note changed as a voice changes after a long illness. Not broken, not weaker, only more itself. Those who had known it all their lives could tell by the first echo if fog lay down by the river or if the north pasture held frost. If the sheep had pressed toward the hedge or bunched upon the hill, they could tell how far a stranger might be who walked the ridge road by the way the sound returned from the standing stones. Thus the bell became not only the measure of time, but the measure of space, setting the valley within a sounding body that was at once bronze and air and attention, when the rope at last wore through at the high beam, where no ladder could be safely set. The men of the village met by lantern light and argued with low voices because no one wished to be loud beneath the tower's silence. They spoke of lowering the bell, of laying it in the yard and feeding it small fires so that its metal might be made young again. A very old man, who had once shinnied up the inner frame as a boy to rescue a pigeon that had trapped its wing against the yoke, said only this: "The bell is not only metal, it is the way we have held it. Place the rope, but do not lay the bell on its back in the grass, for a bell learns the shape of heaven it hangs beneath." So they spliced a new length to the old, where the men with steady heads could go, setting their feet into the web of beams, their palms black with pitch. They came down with their eyes round and quiet, and said nothing of what they had felt up there. But in their sleep for many nights they dreamed of being held in the still body of air that lives above the sound a moment before the tongue strikes. Once thieves crossed the yard after moonset and put their hands to the rope with the thought to pull the bell fast and shallow until its clapper broke the pin and fell, then to take the pin to mark it as iron and the bronze to melt by night in a hollow. The rope moved beneath their hands as if someone else pulled back. They laughed softly, believing the story of the ringer to be the story of children. They pulled again. The rope lifted and fell of its own weight once, and the three men felt heat along their palms as if it had been laid in fire. They left then, with their hands against their bellies, as when one is hurt, and in the morning the villagers found no harm done. They did not speak of the attempt, because some things are better left to the bell to answer. Far away, among hills that roll like sleeping cattle, a manor bell cracked and was recast, and the new bell would not speak rightly. It had a noble lip and a handsome crown, but each time it was swung, it gave a sulky tone, as of a man forced to say grace quickly. The master of that house, hearing of the tower that had taught itself to keep a right measure even after its keeper had gone, sent men with horses to ask if the village bell would be loaned a week to hang in his place, so that the men who fed his bell's fire might hear what the right tone should be. The villagers gathered in their narrow nave, looked at one another, and then at the old man's stick in the corner. They shook their heads gently. "Bells are like trees," said the priest. "They root in the air where they hang. A bell lifted out of its air will forget the tongue of its ground." The messenger bowed, and in his bowing learned something not written upon parchment. There were nights when the wind stood down and the sound went up instead of out. Those were the hours in which, standing in the yard with one's chin lifted to the dark, one could imagine the toll passing among the stars, caught and carried by the same invisible lines that shepherds read when they find their way between hedges at night. On such nights the firmament seemed to breathe with the bell, a wide inhalation that gathered the whole black curve in a slow exhalation that gave back the pinpricks of light. The sound did not frighten the sky, it joined it. Children of children who had lived when the ringer died grew old. They forgot his name and said simply, the ringer, as a man says the river or the wood. Not because there is only one river or one wood, but because the one he knows has taught him the word. His story, carried beyond the valley, became thinner and yet greater, thinner, because details fell away like chaff. Greater, because what remained was grain. He was no longer the man with a cough and a long beard and a habit of sitting beside the rope after vespers with his hands open upon his knees. He was the act of setting weight against weight, of entering the measure that makes time bearable. When snow lay deep one winter and the path to the tower was a trough through whiteness, the youngest of the rope men lost his breath upon the stairs and sat with his back against the pier to gather it. He felt the stones cold come into him. It was not unkind. In the dimness, his eyes made a man standing by the opposite wall, though he knew no man stood there. He did not pray. He had already prayed by the taking up of the rope. He sat a little longer, and then rose and went on, and set his hands to the pull. The bell answered with a winter tone that was clean as bread. In the year when the roof tiles had to be reset and the lead melted and poured again into seams that wind had widened, the men upon the roof worked in a silence one does not choose, but receives from a place that has already learned it. Between their tools and their breath, they heard the day run like a deep river beneath them. When the evening toll began while they were still aloft, they set their hammers down not because anyone had told them to, but because the sound required empty hands. The bell's vibration came up through the rafters and into their bones and made their teeth feel steady. Afterward, they finished what could be finished before the light went, and when they descended, the first man stopped upon the fourth stair from the ground and put his palm against the inner wall, as a man does to feel the heart of a horse after a ride. Thus the years went, and thus the sound held them, and thus the legend widened until it could not be kept within words. It lived instead in acts, the steadying of a bowl before the dough poured loose, the setting of a pace that would carry, a sack from barn to mill without loss of breath, the straightening of a back in a field because a sound had said it was time to straighten. The bell did not change the world. It admitted the world to itself. It did not speak the names of days. It allowed the day to say its own name. It did not keep men from dying. It let death arrive as a known step upon a known stair. There came an evening when fog lay so thick in the square that the lamps were small moons drowning in a pale sea. The rope men stood at their station and saw only their hands upon the hemp. The first pull brought no answer because the fog took the sound into itself and would not give it back. They pulled again, and the bell struck again, and still the fog ate it. On the third pull, the sound found its path narrow as a thread through clothand, went out across the blind fields. A shepherd on the farther bank, hearing it, raised his head and laughed because the fog had made a room, big enough for his loneliness, and the bell had opened a door in it. On the last night of a long year, the village lay quiet, not with feasting, but with weariness, the sort of weariness that is a harvest of smaller harvests. The bell was not rung at an uncommon hour. It kept the same measure as always. Yet those who listened closely heard beneath its tone the thin singing of the first frost. At the corners of window panes and the slow settling of ash upon the hearths, and the sigh of the oxen's ribs under their winter blankets, they heard the small gratitude of chairs for the weight taken from them and the contentment of buckets to be empty. All of this the bell gathered and bore and let go, and in letting it go, taught the village how to place it. By then, there was no longer anyone living who could say what the ringer's face had been. Of those who tried to remember, one saw only a pair of hands dark with rope, another a beard powdered by dust, another the curve of a shoulder under a cloak. It did not matter. The face had become the bell's mouth. The breath, the bells. Breath, the hands, the hands upon the rope now. He was here in the way a form remains after a man rises, the hollow his body had made on a bench, the warmth he had left in a glove. The tower had learned him and kept him. And because the tower stood inside the day as a spine stands within the body, the day kept him also, and still when everything had been set into the valley and set again. When children had grown and the wall of the yard had been mended twice and once again. When the pigeons' nests had fallen and been rebuilt and fallen again. When the bronze had darkened deeper than rain, and the hemp had been replaced more times than anyone could number. Still the rhythm abided, as if both older and younger than the tower, both nearer and farther than the ears. It began as always with the weight gathering, with the breath being set, the small inward nod that prepares the body to answer what is larger than the body. Then came the first movement, the rope's long sigh through the hands, the bell's intake as it swung, and the old consonants that time had learned to say to itself. The tower endured, though its stones leaned and its timbers bowed beneath weight. Of years ivy climbed its flanks, wind carved its corners, moss darkened its crevices. The bronze bell above hung blackened with age, its lip chipped, its crown scarred, its voice deeper with each passing season. The rope stretched downward, patched and knotted, coarse with tar, bearing the memory of countless hands. No cot lay beneath it now, no cloak, no lantern. Only dust, only silence, only the breath of a presence that was no longer flesh. Yet the bell tolled still. Stronger arms had taken up the rope, younger feet climbed the circling stair, pulled and the bell spoke and the village listened. But always there lingered the sense that they were not alone, that the rope bore more than their weight, that the sound carried more than their strength. Beneath the bronze voice another could be heard, faint, steady, older, a breath within the toll, prayer within the silence, a life within the echo. And so the story spread beyond the valley. Beyond the hills, beyond the rivers, it passed upon the tongues of pilgrims, of merchants, of monks. It reached towns where no one had seen the tower yet. All had heard of it. They spoke of a bell that rang not by hand alone, but by spirit, of a ringer who had labored past death, of a presence bound to bronze and rope. In distant cloisters, monks chanted verses that named him not man but symbol. They said he was the breath of time, the servant of eternity, the voice of silence. They drew the bell upon parchment not as metal but as a sphere of the heavens, its tongue the axis of the earth. They said each toll was a turning of the world, each echo the passage of an age, each silence the rest between creations. Their chants rose in dark halls, low and steady, echoing like the toll itself, until walls seemed to tremble as towers tremble when bronze speaks. In markets, among stalls of cloth and grain, merchants repeated the tale. They said the bell was heard even when it did not sound, that men woke at night with its echo in their ears, though no rope had been pulled. They said it tolled for kings and beggars alike, for weddings and burials, for harvest and famine. Said no bell rang alone, for all were joined by the unseen rope of the eternal ringer. Buyers and sellers bowed their heads when church bells struck, whether near or far, as though the toll were not of one town, but of the world itself, in fields. Farmers lifted their eyes at the sound of bronze. They no longer asked who pulled the rope, for they believed the ringer himself, unseen, bent still at his task. They worked in rhythm with the toll, set their tools by its measure, rested in its silence. Their children learned to count their days not by sun alone but by bell, and when asked what voice it was they heard, they answered simply, his seasons turned. Spring floods carried the sound far along swollen rivers. Summer heat thickened its voice in dry air. Autumn winds bore it into forests where leaves trembled. Winter snow muffled it until it seemed to rise from beneath the earth. Yet in all seasons it endured, steady, unbroken. And wherever it reached, men felt its presence not only in ears but in bones, not only in hearing but in breath. The legend widened until it was no longer legend but creed. Priests spoke of the bell as sacrament, monks as scripture, poets as song. They said the ringer had become the measure of time, that his breath was the rhythm of days, that his silence was the promise of eternity. They said stars turned as bells turned, that the heavens swung upon unseen ropes, that the echo of creation was the echo of bronze. Travelers told of hearing the bell where no bell stood, upon lonely roads, upon high ridges. Upon high ridges they swore the sound came faint but steady, as though the ringer followed them, guiding, watching. Some said they saw him, a pale figure with beard white as frost, cloak heavy, eyes dim, lantern faint. Others said they felt only a hand upon their shoulder when they faltered, steadying them, guiding them onward. All agreed the ringer endured. And so he became more than memory, more than presence. He became parable, not man, not ghost, but rhythm. He was the act of pulling, the sound of bronze, the silence after. He was time itself, measured and endured. He was eternity made audible. The tower aged. Its roof sagged, its mortar crumbled, its stones leaned. Yet it stood because it had become more than stone. It was axis, it was altar, it was breath. The bell darkened, its scars deepened, its voice grew heavier, yet it told. Because it had become more than metal, it was heartbeat, it was scripture, it was silence. The rope frayed, knotted, patched, yet it hung because it had become more than hemp. It was lifeline, it was covenant, it was eternity. Children grew with this as truth, not tale. They bowed at its sound, they hushed at its echo, they whispered its presence in their games. Old men died with it in their ears, their last breath leaving as toll faded. Women labored with it in their bones, their strength steady in its rhythm. All lived within its measure, as fish live within water, as birds within air, and when distant bells tolled, in towns beyond hills, in cities beyond rivers, men and women bowed their heads there too, for they said all bells were his bell. All. Rope's his rope, all toll's his toll. They said his breath was the hum beneath all bronze, his hand the strength within all arms, his silence the stillness after all echoes. They said he was not in one place, but in all, not in one time, but in all. The tower still stood, though its stones leaned outward, though ivy wrapped its walls like the veins of age, though wind whispered endlessly through cracks worn open by centuries. Its roof sagged, timbers bowed, mortar fell in powder to the yard below. The bell within hung vast and dark, scarred with time, chipped at the lip, greened with moss, heavy with silence between its tolls. The rope swayed faintly in draught, patched with knots, coarse with tar, a thread that bound past to present man. To eternity, no cat lay beneath it now. No cloak rested upon a stool, no lantern flickered weakly against shadow. The ringer's body was long since earth, his breath long since dust, yet his presence was not gone. It clung to the tower as ivy clings. It moved through rope as water moves through hemp. It trembled in bronze as air trembles before thunder. He was not remembered as man, but as rhythm. His labor had not ceased. It had changed its form. The bell tolled still, though hands that pulled were new. Young arms bent their strength to the rope, yet when they faltered, they felt another strength beside them, unseen. The sound that rolled from bronze was not only their doing. Beneath it, faint but steady, another voice lingered, older, deeper, patient. They said the ringer had become the toll itself, that his soul struck the tongue, that his breath carried the echo, that his silence filled the pause. The village lived within this truth, and the truth widened beyond the village. In valleys far, men bowed when their own bells spoke, saying, "He is here too." In towns beyond rivers, women hushed children at toll, whispering, "Listen, that is his breath." In cloisters, monks wrote of him not as spirit of tower, but as figure of cosmos, the one who labored eternally, whose hands kept time itself from falling apart. They said each toll was the heartbeat of the world, each echoed the breath of eternity, each silence the waiting before creation's next word. The story grew vast, until no man could say where it began or where it ended. Some said he had been the first ringer. Some said no man at all, but eternity clothed in dust. Some said he was time itself, wearing a cloak, holding a rope, pulling forever. None argued, for all were true. Seasons passed uncounted. Floods swelled, dust rose, leaves fell, snow gathered. Through each the tower endured, the bell tolled, the rope swayed. Age pressed upon stone and timber. Its cracks widened, beams sagged. The stair leaned. The bell itself groaned when swung, as though weary of its burden. The rope frayed even where patched, its fibers thin as hair. Yet still the toll came, deep and heavy, rolling outward into fields and valleys, across forests, and rivers, into hearts and bones. Villagers spoke more softly now, when passing the tower. They said it was nearing its end, yet they did not fear, for they believed the ringer had never been stone, nor rope, nor bronze, but presence itself. If tower fell, if bell cracked, if rope frayed to dust, he would endure, for his voice was silence, and silence cannot be broken. One winter night, the storm came fierce. Wind tearing at roof, rain lashing stone, lightning flaring white through slits. The rope whipped in the draught, the bell swayed upon its yoke, the tower groaned. Men climbed with lanterns to secure what they could, but the stair shook, beams split, dust fell in clouds. They fled, fearing collapse, yet through storm and thunder. The bell tolled, not by hand, but by force greater than hand. Its voice rolled against wind, struck through thunder, answered lightning. Villagers huddled in houses, trembling, and swore they heard not storm but eternity speaking, vast and final. When morning came, the storm had passed. The tower still stood, though wounded. Stones had fallen, beams cracked, roof broken. The bell hung, yet dark and vast, its rope swaying. Villagers gathered in silence, gazing upward. They feared it would never toll again. But at noon, when sun broke pale through cloud, the rope moved, slow, steady, unseen hands guiding. The bell swung, groaned, spoke. Its sound was heavier, deeper, slower, as though bearing not only the hour, but the weight of all hours. Tears fell upon cheeks, not of sorrow, but of reverence. They said, "He is not gone. He endures still." From that day, the bell tolled fewer times, slower, heavier. Its sound rolled not only across village and valley, but seemed to sink into earth, to rise into sky. Travelers spoke of hearing it far from where sound could carry. Shepherds on distant hills swore they felt its toll in their chests, though no air moved. Sailors on rivers said the water trembled with its echo, though they were miles away. Pilgrims said they dreamed of it before they arrived, and when they woke, the sound was in their ears. Thus the ringer became more than legend, more than parable, became presence beyond place, beyond tower, beyond time. His toll was the toll of the world, his silence, the silence of stars. Men said galaxies swung his bells, their light the echo of his rope. They said time itself was his stair, each step the fall of an age, each breath the pause between tolls. They said when the last toll came, it would not end the world but reveal its silence, the silence that had always been beneath sound. The tower leaned further. The bell cracked faintly at its lip, the rope thinned. Yet the rhythm endured. Villagers no longer feared collapse, for they knew the ringer was not stone nor bronze, but silence itself. They left offerings not at tower's base, but in fields, in rivers, in woods. All places are his tower now, and when at last the bell tolled on a winter night, slow, heavy, deep, its echo lingered longer than sound should linger. It rolled outward, not fading, but deepening, widening, spreading until all air seemed filled. Villagers knelt in fields, monks bowed in cloisters, travelers stilled on roads. All listened, hearing within it not only bronze, but eternity, not only toll, but silence. When the echo faded, it did not end. It remained steady, unbroken, as though silence itself had learned to speak. The tower stood, though its stones leaned outward, though cracks opened in its mortar, though ivy bound its flanks as tightly as ropes once bound the hands of the ringer. The bell within hung vast and solemn, its lip chipped, its body greened with age, its tongue scarred. The rope descended still, coarse with tar, knotted and patched. No hand held it now. No cot waited in shadow, no lantern burned, no cloak hung. Folded, The ringer had passed beyond flesh, yet the place still bore the breath of his labor. Asterisk when the bell tolled. Its sound was deeper than before, slower, heavier, like earth speaking to itself. Those who heard no longer asked who pulled the rope, for they knew no one did. The sound rose of its own accord, moved by presence unseen, by rhythm that had outlived all arms. It rolled outward through the village, across the fields, into the forests and rivers, but it did not end there. It carried beyond, into mountains, into seas, into the still vault of stars. Men and women bowed their heads at its voice, whether near or far, for they felt it in their bones. The villagers no longer spoke of the ringer as man nor as ghost. They spoke of him as silence itself, clothed in sound. They said each toll was his breath, each echo his prayer, each silence his rest. They said he had become the bell, the rope, the tower, the very act of time. They said the world turned because he turned it, that hours passed because he told them. That silence endured because he kept it. Children born into this truth did not ask who he was. They knew him as they knew dawn or rain, not as tale, not as memory, but as rhythm.
Ow.
When they heard the bell, they hushed, for it was older than speech. When they played, they counted by its toll. When they slept, they dreamed its sound, steady. Unbroken, their elders told them, "Listen, and you will hear him breathing." They listened, and they believed. Beyond the valley, the story had grown vast, dissolving into myth. Monks in distant cloisters wrote of him as parable of eternity. Said the cosmos itself was his tower, the stars his bells, the galaxies his echoes. They said his rope was time, stretched between birth and death, pulled by unseen hands. They said his silence was the silence before creation, and his toll the word that brought it forth. Pilgrims came from distant lands, walking roads long and harsh to kneel in the square and hear the toll. They left offerings at the tower's base, though wind carried them away, though river bore them off, though pigeons scattered them. They left them still, for it was not the keeping but the giving that mattered. And when they listened, they swore they heard not only bronze but more, the faint cough of lungs filled with dust, the slow breath of an old man, the steady rhythm of weary arms. They swore they saw a pale figure in the belfry, cloak heavy, beard white, lantern dim. They wept, not from fear, but from recognition. They said, "He endures." The bell itself grew weary. Its lip cracked further, its tone deepened, its swing slowed. The rope thinned, frayed, fell in strands. The tower leaned. Beams sagged, stones fell. Villagers feared it would collapse, yet when they listened, they felt no dread. For they knew the ringer was not stone, nor rope, nor bronze. He was presence, he was rhythm, he was silence. If tower fell, if bell shattered, if rope turned to dust, he would remain, for silence cannot be broken. One winter's night, the tower groaned under weight of snow, the rope frozen stiff, the bell motionless. Villagers huddled in their homes, waiting. They thought the toll would not come. In the stillest hour, when stars burned cold, the sound rose. Slow, heavy, vast, it rolled across roofs, across fields, across forests, across seas, into the vault of heaven. It lingered long, longer than sound should linger, echoing not only in air, but in bones, in stones, in stars.
All
who heard fell, 2 knees weeping. They said it was not bell, but eternity itself speaking. Afterward, silence held. Days passed, then weeks. The bell no longer tolled. Villagers waited, listening, yet no sound came. They feared the tower had ended, that silence had consumed it. Yet as they listened more closely, they realized silence itself had become the toll. The rhythm remained, though no bronze moved, no rope swung. They heard it in their breath, in their hearts, in the rustle of leaves and the hush of snow. They heard it in the stars. And so the ringer became not story, not presence, not legend, but silence itself. He was the hum beneath all things, the rhythm within all breath, the pause between all words. He was not remembered, but never forgotten. He was not seen, but always present. He was absence that was presence, death that was life, silence that was sound. The tower leaned in ruin, the bell hung still, the rope frayed to dust. Yet all knew they endured still, for the ringer endured. He had become cosmos, eternity, silence.